Hey guys, it's Sagar, and in this video, we are looking at the cameras on this Redmi Note 12 Pro. Unlike its bigger brother, the Redmi Note 12 Pro Plus, which comes with a 200 megapixel camera, this one comes with a 50 megapixel Sony IMX766 sensor as the main camera on its back. We have seen this image sensor take some amazing pictures on some of the other phones, and I expect it to do the same on this Redmi Note 12 Pro. I have a lot of image and video samples to show you guys, and I don't want this video to be too long, so to save us some time, I will just list down all the camera specs on this shot. You can pause the video and go through them if you want. With that out of the way, let us begin with the image samples from the main camera which I took during the daytime. Now if you guys missed it, in my last video I took a very deep dive into the cameras of the Redmi Note 12 Pro Plus. And if I'm being honest, I think these daytime shots on the Redmi Note 12 Pro look just as good as the ones from that phone, maybe even slightly better since each individual pixel on this 50 megapixel Sony IMX766 sensor is a bit bigger. Yes, all these images are shot with the 50 megapixel main camera, but these are 12 megapixel bin shots. We will get to the full resolution 50 megapixel shots a bit later on in the video. Just look at these images, they are filled with a ton of details. You will not see these 12 megapixel shots falling apart even if I zoom in 2 to 3 times on them. Normally Redmi applies a lot of sharpening and processing to these images, but that is not the case with this phone. These daytime shots don't look to be over sharp or over processed at all. There is a small amount of noise in the darker parts of these indoor daytime shots, but you won't notice it unless you are zooming in and actively looking for it. I was surprised by how well the colors are represented in these shots. They are not oversaturated, there is just the right amount of contrast, and thankfully, the color temperature and white balance of these shots is also similar to how the scene looked in real life. In the last video, we saw that the Note 12 Pro Plus tried to cool the warmer tones down a bit, but that is not the case with this Redmi Note 12 Pro. These colors are almost exactly as they were in real life, which is an amazing thing to get right on a phone in this budget. If you want to have a bit more saturated looking colors in your images, you can turn on the AI mode while you are clicking them, and that should take care of the things for you to some extent. The HDR mode on this phone is turned off by default, and I would suggest you to hit this button as it would put the phone in auto HDR mode. Remember, the HDR mode is active only when this HDR text turns yellow. With it set to auto, you can take some really good shots like this one. The sun was setting behind these trees, and you could see all the amazing colors of the sky and the details in the trees at the same time. Here is another example of how good the HDR mode on this phone is. Again, the sun was about to set, but we still see so much information in this image. Other than the sun itself, there are barely any overblown or darker areas in this shot. When you have people in your shot, this phone tries to keep them evenly lit, and to achieve that, it might even increase the exposure of the entire shot, blowing up the brighter parts. But you can tap on the subject and lower the exposure slider manually to make the images look a bit more balanced. That is what I did with this shot. These are some very tricky situations. The Redmi Note 12 Pro did really good with all these images. It also tries to keep the colors looking good in these tough lighting conditions. I have a feeling that this phone is handling the dynamic range even better than the Redmi Note 12 Pro Plus. When you want to take close-up shots, this phone is fast at setting the focus on any nearby object, but it is not the most accurate one though. These shots look really good and the subject is in sharp focus, but I had to take a few of these shots multiple times because the phone at times was trying to focus on something different altogether. This is not that big of a deal as it did not happen more than 2 or 3 times, but I thought it did happen, so I should still mention it in the video. Despite of this being a big image sensor, the minimum focusing distance is really good. You can get up and close to your subject and the phone will still set the focus, and thanks to the wide aperture, we get a really nice natural optical bokeh to the background of these close-up shots. There is a macro camera if you want to get even closer to your subject. It is just a 2 megapixel sensor, so these shots are not the most detailed ones, and it also won't let you get closer than 4 centimeters of your subject, so I'm not sure if you should even call them macro images. But this is how they look, and you can decide for yourself if you would want to use it or not. If you are planning on using it, to make the most of this 2 megapixel sensor, just make sure to take these shots in a lot of light, ideally in natural sunlight. Third and the final camera at the back gets an 8 megapixel sensor and a wide lens, and this is how much more of the scene it will let you get in the shot compared to the normal one. This wide lens is really nice to capture more of the scene, and it also gives a different perspective to your shot. As it is just an 8 megapixel sensor, these images are not as detailed and nowhere as sharp as the ones from the main camera. That being said, if there is enough light while you are taking these images, they will end up looking good. And unless you are zooming in on them, you can't really tell that these wide shots don't have a lot of details. Did you notice the difference between the color temperature and white balance between these normal and wide shots? Redmi should have worked a bit on getting this right on both these lenses. We should be seeing similar colors and white balance from both these cameras. Now we look at the 50 megapixel shots and compare them with the 12 megapixel ones to see how much more information they have. From this far, it is almost impossible to see any difference between these images. Like on most phones, we will have to zoom in at least 5 times to notice any difference between the 12 and 50 megapixel shots. This always makes me think that are the high resolution shots even worth it on any of these phones? Firstly, they are 4 to 5 times larger in terms of file size. And secondly, you don't even see a clear difference between them and the default 12 megapixel ones. I personally feel that it is best to stick to the default mode for most of your shots and only switch to the 50 megapixel mode when you are trying to take pictures of some landscape or architecture in broad daylight where you would want to preserve every small detail, or if you know that you are going to crop in on a certain part of an image later on. That brings us to the portrait mode. Again, if you saw my last video, you might know that I was not very happy with the portrait mode shots on the Note 12 Pro Plus, and this Note 12 Pro is not all that different. Again, it gets the colors and skin tones in these shots right, but the edge detection is just not the best. I feel like it is a bit better than the one from the Note 12 Pro Plus, but we still see a hard line separating our subject from the background. The portrait shots look much more natural when the edges have a softer blur roll-off. The dynamic range also takes a big hit while taking portrait shots. I wish the HDR mode was available while taking these shots because then the background won't be blown out like in these shots. Portraits of objects are not that different either. They also don't have the best edge detection, but the colors in these shots look good. Usually, Redmi phones do really good with portrait shots, so I hope Redmi is working on getting this mode much better with software updates on this phone. With that, let us move on to the artificial and low light shots. These are some of the shots which I took after the sun has just set, and as you can see, this phone has no problem capturing a ton of details in each one of them. I have noticed this with most of the newer mid-budget phones that they are really good when there is any sort of ambient light around. I think I could not say the same for the phones which are even just a couple of years old. If we zoom in on these shots, they might not be as detailed as the ones which we took during the daytime, which was to be expected. But without zooming in too far, these images look really good. As the light got even lower, the main camera still kept on capturing really good looking images, but I noticed the capture speed getting a bit slower. I mean, the phone was trying to keep the shutter open for a slightly longer time to capture more light, and OIS becomes really helpful in these situations. This was one of the major things that I found to be missing on the Realme 10 Pro Plus when we checked out its cameras about a month back. Now it is going to be really interesting when I put the cameras on the Realme 10 Pro Plus and this Redmi Note 12 Pro against each other. Make sure you have the notifications turned on so you don't miss out when I upload that video. Coming back to this phone, as the light gets even lower, you can switch to the night mode. Auto night mode is actually enabled by default on this phone. So if the light gets low enough, this phone will automatically start taking night mode shots. But I feel like these shots, however detailed they are, take much longer to capture. So for taking my shots, I like to have the control to choose when the night mode should be turned on. As you can see, the night mode adds in a lot of light in these images, but it also brings up the noise level in the process, and if you're not careful in holding the phone steady, some of these night mode shots might even be blurred out. This night mode also adds a lot of sharpening to the images, which I am not a big fan of. But if you don't mind this look, you will really like the nighttime shots on this phone. The wide lens on this phone takes less desirable images in lower lighting conditions. There is a night mode for the wide lens as well, but even then it doesn't take that much better looking shots. There is some more light and a little less noise in these night mode shots, but they still don't look good enough. These ones also take over 3 to 4 seconds to capture, so there are a lot of chances that many of your night mode wide shots will be blurred out. My suggestion is to always stick with the main camera if the lighting conditions are anything less than ideal. With that, we come to the final camera on this phone, which is at the front. This is the same 16 megapixel camera that we saw on the Note 12 Pro Plus, and it again suffers from the same issues. Firstly, the beauty or skin smoothing mode is on by default, so you can turn it on if you don't like that look. And second, this phone doesn't capture very good looking skin tones or colors. Skin appears to be too pale in these selfies, and the overall image also seems to be lifeless due to the lack of saturation in colors. There seems to be a bit less processing or over sharpening in these selfies compared to the 12 Pro Plus. So if the skin tones and colors could be improved a bit, I think most people will be satisfied with this selfie camera. Edge detection for portrait shots is again not the best, but I feel it is still better than the one from the rear facing camera. There is not a hard line separating the subject from the background, so these portrait selfies don't look very unnatural. But the colors are again a bit desaturated and the skin still looks pale. The dynamic range for normal selfies is really good if you remember to turn the HDR mode on. But there is no such option for portrait selfies, so as you can see, if you have brighter background while you are taking portrait selfies, the background will be completely blown out. Here's a video from the front-facing camera of the Redmi Note 12 Pro. You can see how it handles the overall colors of the scene, exposure, and stabilization when I am walking around with it. The maximum resolution at which this camera can shoot in is 1080p 60 fps, and this video is being shot in 1080p 30 fps. Since we get OIS on the main camera, these 4K 30fps videos don't look horribly shaky even if electronic stabilization is not available at this resolution. There is a bit of wobble with each of the steps which I am taking because OIS seems to be trying to compensate for my footsteps, but the video still looks much better than the unstabilized ones. If you want optical image stabilization and electronic stabilization to work together, then you will have to drop the video resolution and frame rate down to 1080p 30fps. As you can see, these videos look very stable, but you do lose out on the crispiness and details of the 4K resolution. Compared to the 4K videos, these 1080p ones start to look blurry. With that, we have seen close to 90 image and videos from this Redmi Note 12 Pro. And for most of them, we could say that this phone is doing a really good job for its price segment. Its daytime shots are really good, and I feel they are virtually indistinguishable from some of the phones which are priced much higher than this. The colors and dynamic range it produces is really good, and the artificial and low light performance is also very commendable. It might not be the best for low lighting conditions, but it is still really good for the price. I just feel that Redmi needs to push out a few software updates to improve the portrait mode and selfie performance, and I think that might make these cameras even better than the ones on the higher priced Redmi Note 12 Pro Plus. I know it's a bold statement, so to check the real life performance of these cameras, I will be comparing them in my next video, so make sure you don't miss that because I have some really juicy takes in that one. Alright, so if you guys are looking for a good phone under 25,000 rupees, I think this Redmi Note 12 Pro is the one you should be looking at. If you know how to take images and have realistic expectations from this price segment, then it ticks most of the boxes that a good smartphone's camera should in this price range. After looking at all these image and video samples, what do you guys feel about these cameras? Let me know in the comments. That is it for this video guys. Please hit the like button if you enjoyed this video and subscribe to the channel for a lot more quality tech videos like this. You can also check out some of the other videos from this channel. This has been Sagar and I will catch you guys in the next video. Take care.